Namaste and a warm welcome to the Ex-Christian Show, the insider view of Christianity from the outside. Is the Bible a divine handiwork? That is the question we are examining in a series of videos, of which this is part 2. After talking about contradictions in part 1, let's look at absurdities in this part. As I mentioned, the goal of these videos is to show that the Bible could not have been the work of a being that has the capacity to command the universe into existence. So what is it that critics are referring to when they say the Bible has absurdities? For that, let's look at the definition of absurdity. Cambridge Dictionary defines absurdity as the quality of being stupid and unreasonable. Oxford defines it as something that is wildly unreasonable. With those definitions in mind, let's see if the verses that I point out in this video can be categorized as absurdities. The Bible contains two categories of absurdities, moral and theological. We'll look at moral absurdities first. Given the claims that the Christian God is an intelligent, holy, and righteous God, Christians have an embarrassing task of rationalizing the absurd morality contained in their holy book. Christians argue that it was the people in the Bible that were engaged in such acts and not the God of the Bible. They contend the God of the Bible always tried to discipline them. But in this video, I'm going to point out only those absurdities that Yahweh is directly engaged in. Take for instance slavery and genocide. These are two of the many types of ills that Yahweh condones and orders, respectively. They are enough to prove that the Bible could not have come from a being that is alleged to be the author of morality. Yes, that is what Christianity claims, that the Christian God wrote the moral code on the hearts of all men. They assert, if not for Christianity, its God and its scripture, the world would have been reeling in immorality. The truth is quite the contrary. How can a loving God, who is alleged to have created all races equally in his own image, condone enslavement and mandate genocide of one race at the hands of another? Such verses can only go forth from corrupted human minds. Even though majority of Christians ignores and refuses to acknowledge these verses, most rationalizing Christians cite them as one of their big reasons to quit Christianity. The Judeo-Christian Bible is the birthplace of holy wars and Judaism, the progenitor of holy carnage. While there's no way of knowing if the ancient Jews had indeed carried out genocide in real-time history, given the unverifiability of the slaughtering events that they credited to themselves, their Torah undoubtedly suggests they did. That is why Judaism has to bear the ignominy of being the forerunner of holy wars. But then comes Christianity, that shaped itself on those biblical teachings and indeed acted upon them, carrying out centuries of carnage, annihilating indigenous cultures. The first example of moral absurdity that I want to present is found in the very first book of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 7 verses 22 and 23. Here, the God of the Old Testament drowns every child on the planet in a flood. For those of you who are not familiar with the biblical flood story, it goes something like this. An intelligent designer of the universe created man and thought he did a perfect job and declared it all to be good. But he soon saw that things went beyond his control, and he thought that the only way he could repair the world was by drowning everybody in everything that he had made, including plants and animals, infants, toddlers, and children, and even the unborn ones in the wombs of their mothers. The only people that this flood, they went back to doing the same things again. Perhaps the Bible is the only place where infants and unborn fetuses are declared to be evil and worthy of death by drowning. Such goriness could not have come from the minds of a merciful being. But for the Christian God to be absolved of such ghastly act, Christians would have to accept that this was a work of humans who did not know how to make sense of a devastating local flood that drowned everything and everybody right in front of their eyes. The flood story has more than just moral and theological absurdities. For starters, it has no rational or orderly relationship to general science. The next example is an indicator of insanity and is found in Exodus chapter 10 verses 1 and 2. This text reads, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I might show these signs of mine before him, in order that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your son's son what things I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord.'" Here, Yahweh first hardens the Egyptian Pharaoh's heart and then deliberately prohibits him from releasing the Israelites from 400-year captivity. He then punishes all of Egypt for Pharaoh's resistance to letting them go. And what was the punishment? It was that of killing all Egyptian firstborns and inflicting 9 back-to-back plagues, which affected everyone in that region. In another text, Yahweh admits that he did all of this so that Israel would have stories to tell their grandchildren. I will leave it to you to analyze how sadistic that act is, presuming for argument's sake it indeed happened in real-time history. The next example is of teachings that can only emanate out of misogynistic and racist minds and not from a just being who created all beings equally in his own image. Exodus chapter 21 has detailed instructions about how to treat slaves. Exodus 21 is a chapter that can bring the most devout Christian to a point of at least a momentary doubt as to the origins of the biblical teachings. Another hideousness about this passage is that in verses 7 to 11, the word servant is used interchangeably for a wife, making it sound like a concubine or a sex slave. Apologists argue that slaves were treated like employees in the Israelite society and not as property to be mistreated. But how do they explain the verses that say, "Anyone who beats their male or female slaves with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. They are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property"? Should this instruction be taken as, it is acceptable to beat the slave with a rod to a near-death situation? And does the master deserve no punishment if the slave survives but the beating leaves him or her in a vegetative state? Contrary to what apologists argue, it was not only acceptable to mistreat slaves, they were also not given the same standing as the others in the society. For example, the Bible teaches eye for eye and tooth for tooth, and this rule did not apply to the slaves. Verses 26 and 27 of chapter 21 of Exodus read, "An owner who hits a male or female slave in the eye and destroys it must let the slave go free to compensate for the eye. And an owner who knocks out the tooth of a male or female slave must let the slave go free to compensate for the tooth." It does not say here that the eye of the master must be gouged out or the tooth of the master must be plucked out. There are several passages that suggest that homosexuals are to be executed, and daughters of priests who are prostitutes are to be burnt alive, and apostates are to be stoned to death. Note that there is no punishment for the male customers without whom the prostitutes would not have existed. This particular verse is a clear indicator that it was thought up by chauvinistic minds and could not have been inspired by a being who is praised for his just nature. Something that is also noteworthy here is the fact that the Bible often suggests unnecessarily torturous way of killing, either by stoning to death or by burying alive or by burning alive. Such goriness can only be the result of intense insecurity and acute vengefulness of primitive men. Like they say, hurt people hurt people. In Deuteronomy chapter 21 verses 10 to 21, Yahweh instructs the Israelites to bring home female prisoners of war that they are attracted to as wives. And if they don't find her pleasing anymore, she should be left to go. Note that the woman is not given a choice, either in the matter of becoming a wife to the war victor or in the matter of staying with him if she wishes to. Christians would argue that this is how prisoners of war are treated in any nation and any era. There is no doubt that prisoners of war, whether male or female, have no rights and are taken as property by the victors. That explanation makes sense if the instruction is considered to have come from human leaders and not if it is claimed to have come from a divine being. A just and loving God would have instructed to treat female prisoners of war with respect, or at least give the woman the choice between going with the victor as his wife and not going. Let me point out a few other verses as examples for theological absurdity. The phrase is the name given to situations which portray Yahweh as human. Genesis chapter 6 verse 6 says, "The Lord regretted that he made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled." Such an idea can come forth from men that have made a God in their own image, and not from a God that is alleged to have made man in his own image. Christianity claims that everything that its God does is good. Either that claim is untrue or the verse is. But if the verse is ascribed to humans and not to the divine, then it makes perfect sense. Christians justify this by arguing that here Yahweh was only saddened by how humans turned out. Even then, it is absurd, given that Yahweh is omniscient and knew from the beginning the outcome of his creation. The next example makes it to the list of theological absurdities for many reasons. For one, it shows Yahweh as an imbecile and an antagonistic subhuman being. In Exodus chapter 32 verses 9 through 14, Yahweh is said to have changed his mind when Moses talks him out of killing all the Israelites for what he considers is their stubbornness. This is a humorous story that is analogous to a tussle between an adolescent and his parent. The parent is clasping his adolescent boy who is struggling to get out so he could burn the house down because he was not given to have his way. The parent is trying to talk him out of it by reminding him of the promise of good behavior that the teenager had made earlier. The youth finally relents when the parent notes that his opponents at school will hear of this and will get a chance to ridicule him. Yahweh here acts no different than the adolescent of the analogy. The biblical story goes like this. The Israelites had just been rescued from a 400-year slavery in Egypt and have been brought into the Sinai desert, where they would have to wander another 40 years. By the third month after the rescue, they reached the Sinai mountain. While the people assemble at the foot of the mountain, Moses is gone to the mountain top for 40 days and 40 nights to take dictation of the first set of 10 commandments from Yahweh. The Israelites waiting at the foot fear something happened to their leader and pressurize the second in command, Aaron, to make them a golden calf or bull out of the jewelry they were wearing. Just as the writing of the 10 Commandments is finished, Yahweh tells Moses something to this effect. Go down, because the people have become corrupt and have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and have given the idol the credit of rescuing them from Egypt when it is me who did that favor to them. He also adds, I have seen these people, and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that I can nurture my anger against them, and then I will destroy them. And after I have destroyed them, I will make you into a great nation. To this, Moses says, Lord, why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. At this point, Yahweh relents, and he does not bring his people the disaster he had threatened of. Of course, the most obvious problems are of Yahweh's anger and his subsequent relenting, which are very human qualities and do not belong in the resume of an all-powerful being. But that is the least of the theological problems here. Given that Yahweh is omniscient, he knew that this was a generation that had endured immense adversities as the last generation of slaves in Egypt. He knew of the great turmoil they underwent during the rescue operations that he had carried out in Egypt. 3 months later, here they were, clueless about what had happened to their leader who vanished without a trace for 40 days. Yahweh knew their worry was only natural, having witnessed only uncertainties and hardships all their lives. In addition, resorting to the worshipping of other gods in the event of feeling failed by their Kuladevata was the most common practice in the ancient Near East in those times, because they believed that all gods belonged to the same pantheon. Moreover, the making of idols of other gods was not prohibited in the Israelite society yet. It was yet to come with the 10 Commandments. In a scenario like that, how just is it for Yahweh to punish people for following a common religious practice of the time that he hasn't outlawed yet? The second problem is, being omniscient, he knew that the people were planning to make an idol. He could have stopped them with just a voice command from the mountaintop before they acted on it, especially if he considered that the act was worthy of mass destruction of all involved in it. The third problem is, given that Yahweh is omnipresent, how difficult was it for him to appear to the worried people to assure them that everything was under control? Was that harder than destroying a whole generation of people? And if they were worthy of dying, why take great pains to rescue them just 3 months ago? That too by killing a whole generation of Egyptians, including children. This story is so ridiculous that it could not have come from an all-knowing, intelligent being. In fact, the entire story of 400-year slavery and the Exodus are ridiculous and raise several unresolvable theological problems. For example, why did an intelligent God take 400 years to save a small group of his most favorite people from slavery, when he could create a beginningless and an endless universe and everything in it in just 7 days? But it all makes sense if the story is taken to be written by humans who were creating a story to tell their future generations of their political and religious development in a hostile world. Theological absurdities are not limited to the Old Testament alone. In the New Testament, in the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 11, verses 12 to 14, Jesus curses a fig tree for failing to bear fruit out of season. According to the story, a hungry Jesus goes looking for fruit on a fig tree and finds nothing but leaves on it. The Bible mentions that it was not the season for figs, but Jesus curses it, saying, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." This passage indicates both idiocy and short-temperedness of Jesus. First of all, for an all-knowing God credited with the creation of natural order, to expect a tree to bear fruit out of season is ridiculous. Either he is dumb, or he is plain arrogant, or the story is a myth. Second of all, why lose temper at something he had control over? For someone who could raise people from the dead or turn water into wine, how difficult was it to make a tree bear fruit with just a touch or a command? The last example is a challenge to the very notion that only good comes out of Yahweh and all that is evil is from Satan. A passage in 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 14 proves the contrary. Here, Yahweh is said to have sent an evil spirit to torment Saul, who happens to be the very first king of the Israelites. The evil spirit later tries to kill David. This is a huge theological problem. Christianity brands Satan as the author of evil, and Yahweh is only capable of good. According to them, sin entered into the world only with the evil perpetrated in the Garden of Eden. If Yahweh was capable of creating evil, and he did it once, what are the chances that it was not Yahweh himself in the form of the serpent in the garden that instigated Eve to eat the forbidden fruit? We've already seen that Yahweh does things just so his people would have stories of his might to tell their children and grandchildren. How are Christians sure that he did not play the Adam and Eve drama also with the same intention? Some of the most disconcerting questions that Christianity has to answer are, given the claims of Yahweh's holiness, why is there an evil spirit in the world that acts at the bidding of Yahweh? Where is it now? And if it is not there in the world now, where has it gone? When did it go, and where is it mentioned in the Bible? The other huge problem is the fact that the evil spirit that acts at the command of Yahweh tries to kill David, the most important figure of Judeo-Christianity, both for being the hope of Israel in his time and for being the hope of the world, as Jesus is to be born from David's lineage. There is another example that proves that evil is created by the Christian God. In Isaiah chapter 45 verse 7, the Judeo-Christian God explicitly says that he creates evil, as in he is the author of evil. Some translations have changed the word evil to calamity. The Septuagint translation, however, reads, I, Yahweh, creates evil. This is an irreconcilable contradiction to the verse in the New Testament in 1 John chapter 1 verse 5, which says, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Christians might argue that Isaiah is Old Testament and 1 John is New Testament. Even then, there is a problem. They claim that the God of the New Testament is the same as the God of the Old Testament. The proof of the claim is another verse that says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Word here means Jesus. If that is the case, then the two verses are mutually contradictory. But it wouldn't be a contradiction if Christians accept that the two beings are different, or better still, these verses are human creation. There are as many absurdities as there are stories in the Bible, both in the Old and the New Testaments. The only way these passages will desist to seem absurd is by accepting the truth, and that is that the Bible was written by primitive humans that had an uncivilized view of social justice. Written when it was ethically acceptable to slaughter all those people that disagreed with their version of God. Written when it was morally just to treat women like property and children like sacrificial lambs. And most of these events that they were writing were mythical in nature. As long as Christians resist accepting this truth, criticism of the Bible will continue. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next part. Until then, Namaste.